welcome back to part 2 of chapter 7. So, they had just figured out that there are probably other people from other wizarding schools because Harry, Ron, and Hermione are seeing wizards from all over the world. So we're going to pick up where we left off. "You've been ages," said George, when they finally got back to the Weasleys' tent. "Met a few people," said Ron, setting the water down. "You've not got a fire started yet?" "Dad's having fun with the matches," said Fred. Mr. Weasley was having no success at all in lighting the fire, but it wasn't for lack of trying. Splintered matches littered the ground around him, but he looked as though he was having the time of his life. "Oops," he said as he managed to light a match and promptly dropped it in surprise. "Come here, Mr. Weasley," said Hermione kindly, and taking the box from him, and started to show him how to do it properly. At last they got the fire lit, though it was at least an hour before it was hot enough to cook anything. There was plenty to watch while they waited, however. Their tent seemed to be pitched right alongside a kind of thoroughfare to the pitch, and Ministry members kept hurrying up and down it, greeting Mr. Weasley cordially as they passed. Mr. Weasley kept a running commentary, mainly for Harry and Hermione's benefit. His own children knew too much about the Ministry to be greatly interested. "That was Cuthbert Morkridge, head of the Goblin Liaison Office. Oh, here comes Gilbert Wimple. He's with the Committee of Experimental Charms. He's had those horns for a while now. Hello, Arnie. Arnold Peasgood. He's an Obliviator. Member of the Accidental Magical Reversal Squad, you know. Ooh, and that's Bode and Croaker. They're unspeakables." "They're what?" "From the Department of Mysteries. Top secret. No idea what they get up to." At last the fire was ready, and they had just started cooking eggs and sausages when Bill, Charlie, and Percy came strolling out of the woods towards them. "Just apparated, Dad," said Percy loudly. "Ah, excellent. Lunch." They were halfway through their plates of sausages and eggs when Mr. Weasley jumped to his feet, waving and grinning at a man who was striding towards them. "Aha!" he said. "The man of the moment. Ludo!" Ludo Bagman was easily the most noticeable person Harry had seen so far, even including old Archie in his flowered nightdress. He was wearing long Quidditch robes and thick horizontal stripes of bright yellow and black. An enormous picture of a wasp was splashed across his chest. He had the look of a powerfully built man, gone slightly to seed. The robes were stretched tightly across his large belly. He surely had not had in the days when he played Quidditch for England. His nose was squashed, probably broken by a stray bludger, Harry thought, but his round blue eyes, short blonde hair, and rosy complexion made him look like an overgrown schoolboy. Here's Mr. Ludo Bagman. "Ahoy there," Bagman said happily. He was walking as though he had springs attached to the balls of his feet, and was plainly in a state of wild excitement. "Arthur, old man," he puffed as he reached the campfire. "What a day, eh? What a day! Could we have asked for more perfect weather? A cloudless night is coming. Hardly a hiccup in the arrangements. Not much for me to do." Behind him, a group of haggard-looking Ministry wizards rushed past, pointing at distant evidence of some sort of magical fire which was sending violet sparks 20 feet into the air. Percy hurried towards with his hand outstretched. Apparently, his disapproval of the way Ludo Bagman ran his department did not prevent him from trying to make a good impression. "Ah, yes," said Mr. Weasley, grinning. "This is my son Percy. He started at the Ministry. This is Fred. No, George. Sorry, that's Fred. Bill, Charlie, Ron, my daughter Ginny, and Ron's friends Hermione Granger and Harry Potter." Bagman did the smallest of double takes when he heard Harry's name, and his eyes performed the familiar flick upwards at the scar on Harry's forehead. "Everyone," said Mr. Weasley, "this is Ludo Bagman. You know who he is. It's thanks to him that we've got such good tickets." Bagman beamed and waved his hand as if to say it was nothing. "Fancy a flutter on the match, Arthur," he said eagerly, jingling what seemed to be a large amount of gold in the pockets of his yellow and black robes. "I've already got Roddy Potner betting me Bulgarian will score first. I offered him nice odds, considering Ireland's front three are the strongest I've seen in years. And little Agatha Tibbs has put up half shares in her eel farm for a week-long match." "Oh, go on then," said Mr. Weasley. "Let's see. A galleon on Ireland to win?" "A galleon?" Ludo looked slightly disappointed, but recovered himself. Very well, very well. Any other takers?" "They're a bit young to be gambling," said Mr. Weasley. "Molly wouldn't "We'll bet 37 galleons, 15 sickles, and 3 canuts," said Fred, as he and George quickly pooled all their money, "that Ireland wins. But Victor Crumb gets the snitch. Oh, and we'll throw in a fake wand." "You don't want to be showing Mr. Bagman rubbish like that," Percy hissed. But Bagman didn't seem to think the wand was rubbish at all. On the contrary, his boyish face shone with excitement as he took it from Fred, and when the wand gave a loud squawk and turned into a rubber chicken, Bagman roared with laughter. "Excellent! Haven't seen one that convincing in years. I'd pay 5 galleons for that." Percy froze in an attitude of stunned disapproval. "Boys," said Mr. Weasley under his breath, "I don't want you betting. That's all your savings. Your mother—" "Don't be a spoil sport, Arthur," boomed Ludo Bagman, rattling his pockets excitedly. "They're old enough to know what they want. You reckon Ireland will win, but Crumb will get the snitch? Not a chance, boys, not a chance. I'll give you excellent odds on that one. We'll add 5 galleons for the funny wand, then, shall we?" Mr. Weasley looked on hopelessly as Ludo Bagman whipped out a notebook and quill and began jotting down the twins' names. "Cheers," said George, taking the slip of parchment Bagman handed him and tucking it away carefully. Bagman turned most cheerfully back to Mr. Weasley. "Couldn't do me a brew, I suppose. I'm keeping an eye out for Barty Crouch. My Bulgarian opposite number's making difficulties, and I can't understand a word he's saying. Barty will be able to sort it out. He speaks about 150 languages." "Mr. Crouch?" said Percy, suddenly abandoning his look of poker-stiff disapproval and positively writhing with excitement. "He speaks over 200. Mermish and gobbledygook and troll." "Anyone can speak troll," said Fred dismissively. "All you have to do is point and grunt." Percy threw Fred an extremely nasty look and stoked the fire vigorously to bring the kettle back to a boil. "Any news on Bertha Jorkins?" Mr. Weasley asked as Bagman settled himself down on the grass beside them. "Not a word," said Bagman uncomfortably, "but she'll turn up. Poor old Bertha. Memory like a leaky cauldron, and no sense of direction." "Lost. You take my word for it. She'll wander back into the office sometime in October, thinking it's still July." You don't think it might be time to send someone to look for her, don't you?" Mr. Weasley suggested tentatively as Percy handed Mr. Bagman his tea. "Barty Crouch keeps saying that," said Bagman, his round eyes widening innocently. "But we really can't spare anyone at the moment. Oh, talk of the devil! Here's Barty." A wizard had just apparated at their fireside, and he could not have been more of a contrast with Ludo Bagman. Sprawled on the grass in his old wasp robes, Barty Crouch was a stiff, upright, elderly man, dressed in an impeccably crisp suit and tie. The parting of his short gray hair was almost unnaturally straight, and his narrow toothbrush mustache looked as though he had trimmed it using a slide ruler. His shoes were highly polished. Harry could see at once why Percy idolized him. Percy was a great believer in rigidly following rules, and Mr. Crouch had complied with the rule about Muggle dressing so thoroughly that he could have passed as a bank manager. Harry doubted even Uncle Vernon would have spotted him for what he really was. "Pull up a bit of grass, Barty," said Ludo brightly, patting the ground beside him. And here we have Mr. Barty Crouch. "No, thank you, Ludo," said Crouch, and there was a bit of impatience in his voice. "I've been looking for you everywhere. The Bulgarians are insisting we add another 12 seats to the top box." "Oh, is that what they're after?" said Bagman. "I thought that chap was asking to borrow a pair of tweezers. Bit of a strong accent." "Mr. Crouch," said Percy breathlessly, sunk into a kind of half-bow which made him look like a hunchback. "Would you like a cup of tea?" "Oh," said Mr. Crouch, looking at Percy in mild surprise. "Yes, thank you, Weatherby." Fred and George choked into their own cups. Percy, very pink around the ears, busied himself with the kettle. "Oh, and I've been wanting a word with you too, Arthur," said Mr. Crouch, his sharp eyes falling upon Mr. Weasley. "Ali Bashir's on the warpath. He wants a word with you about your embargo on flying carpets." Mr. Weasley heaved a deep sigh. "I sent him an owl about that last week. If I've told him once, I've told him 100 times. Carpets are defined as a magical Muggle artifact by the Registry of Prescribed Charmable Objects. But will he listen?" "I doubt it," said Mr. Crouch, accepting a cup from Percy. "He's desperate to export here." "Well, they'll never replace brooms in Britain, will they?" said Bagman. Allie thinks they're a niche in the market for a family vehicle, said Mr. Crouch. I remember my grandfather had an Axminster that could seat 12, but that was before carpets were banned, of course. He spoke as though he wanted to leave nobody in any doubt of that all of his ancestors had abided strictly by the law. So, been keeping busy, Barty? Said Bagman breezily. Fairly, said Mr. Crouch dryly. Organizing port keys across 5 continents is no mean feat, Ludo. I expect you'll be glad when this is over, said Mr. Weasley. Ludo Bagman looked shocked. Glad? Don't know when I've had more fun. Still, it's not as though we haven't got anything else to look forward to. Eh, Barty? Eh, plenty left to organize, huh? Mr. Crouch raised his eyebrows at Bagman. We agreed not to make the announcement until all the details... Oh, details, said Bagman, waving the word away like a cloud of midges. They've signed, haven't they? They've agreed, haven't they? I bet you anything these kids'll know soon enough anyway. I mean, it's happening at Hogwarts. Ludo, we need to meet the Bulgarians, you know, said Mr. Crouch sharply, cutting across Bagman's remark. Thank you for the tea, Weatherby. He pushed the underdrunk tea back at Percy and waited for Ludo to rise. Bagman struggled to his feet again, swigging down the last of his tea, the gold in his pockets chinking merrily. See you all later, he said. You'll be up in the top box with me. I'm commentating. He waved. Barty Crouch nodded curtly, and both of them disapparated. What's happening at Hogwarts, Dad? Said Fred at once. What are they talking about? You'll find out soon enough, said Mr. Weasley, smiling. It's classified information, until such time as the Ministry decides to release it, said Percy stiffly. Mr. Crouch was quite right not to disclose it. Oh, shut up, Weatherby, said Fred. A sense of excitement rose like a palpable cloud over the campsite as the afternoon wore on. By dusk, the still summer air itself seemed to be quivering with anticipation. And as darkness spread like a curtain over the thousands of waiting wizards, the last vestiges of pretense disappeared. The Ministry seemed to have bowed to the inevitable and stopped fighting the signs of blatant magic now breaking out everywhere. Salesmen were apparating every few feet, carrying trays and pushing carts full of extraordinary merchandise. There were luminous rosettes, green for Ireland, red for Bulgaria, which were squealing the names of the players. Pointed green hats bedecked with dancing shamrocks, Bulgarian scarves adorned with lions that really roared, flags from both countries which played their national anthems as they were waved. There were tiny models of firebolts which really flew, and collectible figures of famous players which strolled across the palm of your hand, preening themselves. Been saving my pocket money all summer for this, Ron told Harry, as they and Hermione strolled through the salesmen, buying souvenirs. Though Ron purchased himself a dancing shamrock hat and a large green rosette, he also bought a small figure of Victor Krum, the Bulgarian seeker. The miniature Krum walked backwards and forwards over Ron's hand, scowling up at the green rosette above him. Wow, look at these, said Harry, hurrying over to a cart piled high with what looked like brass binoculars, except they were covered in all sorts of weird knobs and dials. Omnioculars, said the sales wizard eagerly. You can replay action, slow everything down, and they flash up a play-by-play breakdown if you need it. Bargain, 10 galleons each. Wish I hadn't bought this now, said Ron, gesturing at his dancing shamrock hat and gazing longingly at the omnioculars. 3 pairs, Harry said firmly to the wizard. No, don't bother, said Ron, going red. He was always touchy about the fact that Harry, who had inherited a small fortune from his parents, had much more money than he did. You won't be getting anything for Christmas, Harry told him, thrusting omnioculars into his and Hermione's hands, for about 10 years. Fair enough, said Ron, grinning. Ooh, thanks, Harry, said Hermione. And I'll get us some programs. Look. Their money bags considerably lighter, they all went back to the tents. Bill, Charlie, and Ginny were all sporting green rosettes too. Mr. Weasley was carrying an Irish flag. Fred and George had no souvenirs, as they had given Bagman all their gold. And then a deep, booming gong sounded somewhere beyond the woods, and at once green and red lanterns blazed into life in the trees, lighting a path to the pitch. It's time, said Mr. Weasley, looking as excited as any of them. Come on, let's go. All right, and next week we will pick up with the Quidditch World Cup in Chapter 8. Until then, have fun, and I will see you then.